So good morning everyone, and welcome to the second in our series of Clyde.Scott's Clyde Sustainable Shipping webinars. My name is Ian McGilvray. I'm the Executive Director of CDPI, the Clyde Docks Preservation Initiative. And my colleague Liz Gardiner and I will be hosting the guest panelist presentations and discussion session today. And we're delivering a series of webinars this year in the run-up to the COP26 Climate Change Conference in Glasgow in November. And these webinars are focused on reducing emissions from shipping and what the opportunities there are in that for the Clyde. The first webinar in January looked at sustainable propulsion and retrofit technology, as well as an introduction to the webinar series and our sustainable shipping project aims. I know some of you were at that webinar, and the recording is now available on the Clyde.Scott YouTube channel, and it will be added to the website shortly with a transcript of the audience questions that we didn't have time to cover during the session. This morning is the first of two webinars looking at infrastructure. Today we'll be talking about infrastructure operations, and in the second infrastructure session in April, we'll be looking at development and investment. And these are some of the key issues that need to be addressed. And as an organisation, CDPI's main interest is in protection of maritime infrastructure on the Clyde. And really this is a key element, because if there's no maritime infrastructure on the Clyde, then a conversation about Clyde sustainable shipping is irrelevant, really. We're concerned with the threats to development of infrastructure, and a lot of that has to do with the planning system and local development plans coming from the public sector. So how planning application decisions are taken, the overall strategy of local authority development plans, and the national planning policy. And this all ties in with urban design and placemaking strategies. We can't look at these things in isolation, because the industrial and shipping infrastructure and how we create jobs and build thriving communities is all part of the overall process. More so now in the context of the emerging post-COVID world and the climate crisis. There's a lot of discussion now about the concept of the 15-minute city. And we'll be looking at policy in the last webinar in October, where the technical and economic issues raised throughout the webinar series will support a policy discussion. A major issue on the Clyde is the extent of waterfront that has been redeveloped for residential and retail uses. But there's also issues of flood risk in the waterfront environment, with implications for suitable land use. So we have two grounds identified here to question the appropriateness of further development of residential waterfronts and protect real estate for maritime development. And it's a fundamental question about how waterfront land is used and developed. And there seems to be a shift away from what has for decades been the default option of putting up blocks of flats. In many locations, we've seen local communities priced out of these developments. And in other networks, we're talking about the pros and cons of gentrification. And what we're seeing in places is the infrastructure that could support future skilled job creation for communities being taken over by commuter dormitories. Although it's difficult to criticise or blame any one agency when there's a raft of issues in play. There's economics, land reform, globalisation, and so forth. But there's clearly a need for more joined up thinking across agencies, developers and investors, because a critical issue we're seeing on the Clyde is proximity of key maritime sites to housing developments, and this can limit future industrial development and expansion, and it can lead to, for example, noise complaints from local residents. This is Inch Green, one of the largest dry docks in the UK, and you can see it's only 46 metres from the nearest houses. Garville Dry Dock has more separation, and we'll be hearing more about the facility there shortly. The derelict Govan Dry Docks, that's 47 metres from the nearest house, but this was the case even when the docks, when they were in use. The houses in Govan Road across from the docks are relatively modern, but before that there was a row of tenement blocks along here. And another issue with the Govan docks and waterfront sites in general is increased risk of flooding due to climate change. In the SEPA flood data, you can see the Govan graving docks are at high risk of coastal flooding, and there's a presumption in Scottish planning policy against allowing new, particularly residential developments on a flood risk location, floodplain location. But in the past few years, we've seen a significant shift in the attitudes towards waterfront regeneration on the Clyde. The suitability of housing development is no longer a given. And at the start of 2018, we saw proposals from Ferguson Marine to bring the Govan graving docks back into use as a ship maintenance and engineering facility. And it's fairly certain, with the previous housing proposals being refused planning consent, that if Ferguson hadn't gone into administration over the ferry contracts, this proposal would most likely have gone ahead, even if it needed a compulsory purchase. This is King George V dock between Govan and Braehead. We see proximity to housing isn't an issue here. It's surrounded by industrial estates, retail parks, and a large water treatment works. KGV handles mostly raw materials, bulk cargo vessels, and recently several cruise ships have been laid up here while out of service due to the COVID situation. Rothsay Dock in Clydebank was actually closed for several years before being reopened not that long ago. And this also handles small bulk cargo. And there's a marina and fuel bunkering facility here as well. And of course, bunkering of new fuels is something that sustainable shipping will depend on. And that's something that we'll need to think about for the Clyde. There's also the Finnart oil terminal on Loch Long. That connects to the oil pipeline which feeds through to Grangemouth, but potentially that could be a fuel bunkering facility in the future as well. Greenock Ocean Terminal, this is a major cruise ship terminal, although as I mentioned, this market is on hold here because of the COVID crisis. It's also the Clyde's container port and the only container terminal on the west coast of Scotland. And of course, containerisation was one of the main reasons for decline of shipping on the Upper Clyde. As we've just seen, KGV and Rothsay docks are the only major facilities left. But we can see the ocean terminal is constrained by housing and leisure developments, and there's no railway connection into the terminal, so it relies on road haulage. And as container ports go, Greenock is a fairly small operation, though the amount of freight it handles annually has been increasing in recent years. And the largest container ship to call at Greenock was in 2017, and that has a capacity of just over 4,000 20-foot container units. But looking at that in context, we can see how it compares to the other UK ports and the Panamax capacity. The Panama Canal locks were widened in 2016, more than doubling the container capacity of ships navigating it. The Port of Felixstowe is handling post-Panamax containers. That's vessels too large for the Panama Canal. And the largest container ship in the world, introduced last year, has a capacity of almost 24,000 containers. We're looking at the record visit as opposed to the capacity for Greenock here, but Grangemouth and Tilbury both have a container ship capacity 3 times the largest Greenock has so far handled. And if we look at the berthing depth capacity, though, it suggests that Greenock could handle more, at least on the seaward side. Though, as mentioned, the lack of a rail connection could be a limiting factor, as well as perhaps available space for storage at the terminal. So what all this points to is that perhaps the future of the Clyde is in smaller scale operations, but with a focus on developing new technology and innovation. And we've already heard in the first webinar about some of the technological potential in sustainable shipping. And we have the strong association knowledge with shipping and maritime heritage as an added incentive. And this is the webinar schedule, and we have more upcoming sessions on technology and infrastructure. And our next webinar is Vessel Design and Build on the 30th of March, and we'll be announcing booking and speakers within the next week. And then the next infrastructure session in April looks at development and investment. And today we're looking at infrastructure operations, and that's all from me just now. So I'm going to hand over to Liz to introduce our expert guest speakers.
Thanks very much, Ian. Okay, my name's Liz Gardiner. I'm the Secretary of Clyde Docks Preservation Initiative, and my interest is cultural planning. So with Fable Vision, we've been involved with a large-scale 6 cities artist residency program, looking at the difference that artists can make intervening on post-industrial waterfront heritage zones. And the issues of gentrification and erosion of industrial infrastructure have been very much to the fore. So it's my pleasure this morning to welcome, first of all, Veronica Chan, who is Senior Advisor in Climate Change and Air Quality with the Port of London Authority. Veronica joined the Port of London Authority as a Senior Advisor on Air Quality and Climate Change at the beginning of 2020. She leads work on the development, monitoring and implementation of the PLA's air quality strategy for the tidal Thames to reduce the harmful emissions from marine sources within the tidal river, while facilitating the future growth of the port. She's also responsible for the organisation's adaptation in response to climate change and ensures climate resilience. Over to you, Veronica.
Thanks, Liz, for the introduction, and thank you so much for the invitation. So let me share my screen. So is everyone seeing the screen, my screen okay? I assume so. So good morning, everybody. I will first start by giving you a brief introduction of the Port of London Authority, the PLA. So we're the custodian of the tidal Thames with responsibility for 95 miles of the river from Teddington Lock out to the North Sea. So we work to keep commercial and leisure users safe, protect and enhance the environment, and promote the use of river for trade and travel. So for that, the PLA have vessel fleet of about 30 vessels performing essential duties, including pilot transfer, river patrol, maintenance of mooring and channels. So unlike most UK port authority, the PLA doesn't actually handle any cargoes, and that is done by individual terminals along the river that make up the Port of London. And the Port of London oversees 230,000 vessels movement and handle over 53 tons of cargoes each year. And those numbers are based on the 2019 data. So back in 2016, the PLA has developed the so-called Thames Vision as a plan to set out the collective ambition for the river to 2035. The Thames Vision is currently under review and update, and they're going to extend to 2050. But as one of the 6 goals and priority actions to promote environment and heritage, within that, in the background, the PLA was the first port in the UK to develop an evidence-based air quality strategies in 2018. And by means of evidence-based, we have undertook a detailed air emission inventory to identify the emissions hotspot along the river, and it's also give us a better understanding about the contribution from each different vessel type. Targets and actions was established to reduce the emissions with a target specific to the NOx and PM. The air quality strategies was revised last year, first to align with the DFT guidelines, and now we have include targets and actions for the PLA as an organization. And second is to update the target to reflect the current policies and regulations. Also happened last year, the PLA has launched the Net Zero program. As an organization, the PLA has announced to halve the internal carbon emissions related to 2014 baseline by 2025 and achieve net zero by 2040 or sooner. The program also appraised the way of the Port of London can facilitate and support reaching net zero. And that means considering the consequences and opportunities for the port and the river moving to a net zero economy. The detailed plans for the net zero port is still under development and is expected to complete by mid-year this year, and will continue within the context of the Thames Vision update. So as you can see at the bottom right of the screen, that's a pie chart illustrating the area for the carbon footprint from the PLA as an organization, and vast majority of our emissions actually from the diesel burning within our vessel fleet. So have that in mind. One of the actions within the air quality strategies is the PLA has completed a so-called emissions reduction roadmap, and that's a roadmap for the inland vessels. And it is there to offer direction in reaching current and potential future emissions target through the adoption of existing emissions abatement technologies, such as DPF, diesel particulate filter, and SCR, selective catalytic reduction. And together with the use of low carbon fuels, such as the biofuel. And it's also looking at the emerging low and zero emissions technologies, such as fuel cells, battery technology, and hybrid diesel. So today, the focus is going to be on reducing the emissions for the PLA as an organization. So here, the 2 orange brackets highlight the scenarios and the vessel types that are most relevant to the PLA's duty. And for existing vessels, looking at abatement technologies and low carbon fuel. And for any new vessels, depending on the energy demand and the operational profile and timeline, it's either either consider hybrid, battery, or fuel cell technologies. So the line just as an indicator of where we are now and what we should be considering. And this roadmap has set a perfect background to understand what, when, where the supporting infrastructures might be required to achieve our targets and goals. So just to show you some of the work that we've done so far on our vessel fleet. So here is one of our petrol vessels. And to reduce the fuel consumptions, the solar panel has been installed on 2 of our upper district petrol vessels, and it's there to as a supplement power to the onboard electrical system with an aim of reducing the fuel consumption. And here is the UK first pilot cutter leader that was delivered in spring 2019. So the hybrid vessel can run on batteries for approximately 40 nautical miles on one charge and up to a speed of 15 knots. Also, as part of our air quality strategies, we have undertaken an alternative fuel trial study, which monitor the engine performance and also analyze the exhaust gas emissions in terms of the air pollutant within those exhaust gas. And following the trial and the monitoring, the PLA is now adopting a phased approach biofuel switch across the vessels within the PLA fleet. Last but not the least, the PLA is also retrofitting one of the vessel, Driftwood, with an SCR, and that's with an aim to reduce the emission of NOx. And this vessel is used for collecting rubbish and driftwood along the river. So as said, the reduction roadmap for the vessel set the background for what infrastructures are needed when. So looking at the timeline, for existing vessels, we need to have refueling facility for low carbon fuel, and it was just started the feasibility study to facilitate electric charging and hydrogen refueling. So here is some of our work on our infrastructure so far. As mentioned previously, the PLA is taking a phased approach switch to biofuel, and that's to ensure our service not being disrupted. And in our recent upgrade of one of our operational sites at the Thames Barrier, the PLA has installed fuel tanks that allow having more than one fuel supply at the site. And we have also linked it up new pier with the electrical grid, and that's to allow vessels to plug in when it's at berth. We have also installed solar PV panels on our building roof at 2 of our office sites at Denton and in Gravesend, and that's to generate renewable electricity. Roughly, these new solar panels can generate 120 megawatts per year. And we're also looking at installing a new substation at one of our operational sites at Denton, and that's to cope with the increase in electrical demands from vessels and also from vehicles. We can't look at them in isolation. So instead of just looking at the future demand for the vessels, we're also recognizing that increased demands on land as well. And all other energy saving infrastructures that the PRA has been having since the 90s, and that include solar and wind turbine powered lighthouse, low energy LED navigation light, and solar panels on marker buoyant. So we know that we can't just stop there. There's a lot more questions need to be answered, and there's a lot more work need to be done. So our next priority is to establish a strategic view of the potential solution or mix of solutions to support the transition from carbon heavy fuels to various low or zero emission fuels. And then from there, we can start to develop an infrastructure development plan for the tidal Thames, indicating the type, location, and time frame of these infrastructures. This will be helpful for operators, but also technology providers and their decision making, and it's also accelerating the adoption of different technologies. So recently, as in earlier this month, the PRA has launched the first Sustainable Innovation Fund, and the first call is to seek technical, operational, and investment business partner to establish the port's first zero emission berth, and potentially with a smart and flexible or mobile solution. Another one is the tidal energy. From our previous study, it's indicated the Thames could provide local tidal energy, though it's not very likely to be by traditional turbine technologies, and that's because the space available on the river has become more constrained with the increased river traffic. But we should still try to encourage the use of microgeneration in a way that suited the Thames, and therefore we have made a designated area in the river to facilitate full-size trial for the type of scheme that could use for the Thames. And beside that, we're constantly seek out opportunity that we can demonstrate and investigate different energy provision solutions that's suitable for the Thames and suitable for the marine environment. So thank you very much for your time. And if you're interested in some of the things that I mentioned in this presentation, here are a few links that would, can provide you more information if you're interested. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Thanks for sharing that with us. And please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat to Veronica. Thank you. So next we have Andrew Markham, who's Business Development Manager with Dales Marine Services Limited. Andrew joined Dales Marine as Business Development Manager in August 2020. He's responsible for all business development activities within the group for Aberdeen, Leith, Greenock and Troon, and he's over 30 years as a professional. Over to you, Andrew, and welcome.
Okay, thank you very much for that introduction there. I'll just share the screen here. So yeah, as Liz said, I'm kind of relatively new to the group and to the sort of commercial world of shipping. But it's an interesting position, and lots of things happening, even in the middle of a global pandemic. There's lots of opportunities and lots of things going on. So we're a sort of an operator on the Clyde, so a bit different to Veronica's presentation. But primarily we are in Aberdeen, Leith, Greenock, Troon and Grangemouth, and we have sort of duplicated facilities, dry docking in all of those locations. Just a wee bit about Dales Marine. So long established company dating back to 1987. We have offered support and still do to oil and gas, some new renewable sectors, sort of offshore wind and tide. Aquaculture is starting to become busier and busier as we drift into that. Decommissioning, that is something that's very current, very live in the world we live in, sort of full cycle of vessels. Fabrication, engineering, ship refit and conversion, and dry docking. What's interesting with the ship refit and conversions is that whilst oil and gas vessels are sort of in decline for use, we have sort of offshore wind and aquaculture sectors buying up these vessels and converting them for a second life. So really, you know, it continues sort of either decommissioning or the vessels being sold on and converted to new purposes, which is great and great business for Dales. So the ship repair and conversions, that's really what Dales is known for. You know, if you speak to anybody about Dales, you go, yeah, we've got dry docking, ship repairs. You know, so that's very much the backbone to the business at all our locations. So we, you know, steel repair, renewals, engine strip downs, overhauls, conversions of engines, deck machinery equipment, blasting, coatings, ballast water treatment, gas scrubber installations, MGO conversions, eco-efficiency modifications, and collision repairs. But these sectors of works that we offer, we find that scrubber installations and eco-efficiency are really on the rise as people are seeking to get more efficiency out of their fleets. And as a company, we're always looking at what's the next thing in terms of making these vessels more sustainable, more fuel efficient, and what sort of hybrid conversions are out there. So it's quite an interesting time for us, you know, to sort of be ahead of the game really as these vessels come into docks, and the sort of the time as a sort of a build engineering of spanners and oil and mess is declining and going to laptops and batteries and things like that. So we're constantly striving to find out and be very proactive in finding these opportunities for Dales to adapt to what's going to be the new world. Fabrication, as you would imagine, you know, steel and welding is very much connected with shipping, but we don't just do shipping. We fabricate anything. If it involves a bit of metal and some welding, we want to get involved in that. You know, we manufacture lots of different things. We manufacture bridges, you name it, we'll do it. So we've had to diversify slightly as the world changes. So it's not just shipping. We'll fabricate anything at all for anybody of any size. Probably one of the longest standing services with Dales, which is how it all started back up in Aberdeen, was engineering. And this is an area that is changing very, very quickly. And as I said earlier, we're trying to stay on top of that. You know, we have various vessels coming in and they're doing conventional strip downs of pistons out and cylinder heads changed and all the stuff you'd associate with engineering. But equally so, we have vessels coming in which are hybrid, and we are adapting to that as quickly as we can as those new sort of power plants come in. So engineering is the backbone of the company, but it's also probably one of the fastest changing services that we provide. Mobilization and demobilization. So we get involved a lot with the renewable sector in this, whether it's tidal or whether it's wind, wave, no matter what. So we will have units arriving that need to get mobilized onto support vessels to be taken out to the fields and demobilized as they come back and change of purpose. Predominantly Aberdeen and Leith are very, very busy with those, as that's where the biggest activity is right now with the renewable sector. So again, it used to be we were doing pipelines and things like that for oil and gas. We now find that we're regularly getting involved in mobilizing for wind, wave and tide. We've been doing some really interesting stuff with wave energy. We've been using our dry docks as test beds for a lot of companies who are using it as for measuring out ballast, how operations work. So it's we get involved in lots of different things. But there's a distinct move from the mobilization to the renewable sector, opposed to sort of oil and gas platforms. Decommissioning kind of comes with a sustainability part. We offer a full cycle really for vessels. And 2017, really through demand more than anything else, we started getting involved in the recycling, decommissioning of vessels. That has grown significantly with the world that we're in just now, with ships laid up. So we have a very full order book just now for the decommissioning of vessels. And up until the 1st of January, we were registered with the EU, but we're fully SEPA approved. We can do this at any of our dry docks. We offer the storage and sale of spare parts, so end of life can go on to, into aquaculture sectors, winches, all those sort of things. And we're a ship recycling registered, so we've lots of hoops to go through there. We can't just cut up ships. It's very controlled, it's very efficient. So it's an interesting process that we're involved in. Some of the vessels we've been operating on, so we've got the Ocean Pintail, which is in Leith just now, being decommissioned. She's an ex-nuclear carrying vessel. So we towed her around from Barrow and Furness to the Leith dock. That was tail end of last year, and she's currently in the process of being decommissioned. And we recycle a lot of this stuff. We even donate a lot of the stuff. So, all the furniture that's in these, we basically get them with everything. Some of them still come with charts and everything in it. But all the furniture we donated to like the homeless in Edinburgh, the bridge navigational systems, they actually sometimes get involved, but with the film industry, believe it or not, as props. So there's lots of things that we get involved in when decommissioning a vessel. It's not just a case of cutting it up and disposing of it. We try and recycle as much as we can. Obviously, the steel is a different ballgame, but in terms of the interiors, the soft furnishings, we're very active in trying to find a second life, and we have a really good network throughout Europe of people looking for stuff. And again, that's quite interesting where these things end up. We also get involved in decommissioning with the aquaculture sector, bottom right of that screen. So that's feed barges. They have, at end of life, we simply lift them out, cut them up, dispose of them, and off they go. So again, all sectors, all projects. We don't get involved in decommissioning of oil and gas platforms. We're just not big enough for that. We have to have items that fit into our dry docks. We don't have the capabilities for the bigger stuff, and we're fine with that. We know what we can do, and we're good at it, and we just stick to that. So ultimately, it's vessels up to 200 meters and 24 meters wide, and anything in between we get involved in. We also get involved in decommissioning of link spans. So we've just done stuff for CMAL there at Gurek. Their link span came in and we disposed of it and stuff like that, which is all certified. We have to issue certification to the owner that we've disposed of it in a correct manner. So it's quite heavily regulated, as you would imagine. So decommissioning, again, this will be a short video of what happens, and I'll quickly share that with you. So thanks for that wee video there. It's pretty basic, but it shows you the general idea, and we offer that at all our facilities. That was Leith that we showed there. Part of the current supply and demand is the ship layup facility. You'll notice various cruise ships parked up the Clyde there, and there's vessels just parked up everywhere. And if they're fortunate enough not to be decommissioned and cut up, then they fall into the ship layup process. And again, that's something that we sort of drifted into with the changing world. And it's a package that we basically take over the vessel for the duration of the layup and make sure that it's maintained, ready to go when the need is required. So really, decommissioning and ship layout is really quite new to us. But it's just been driven by, you know, the operators' requirements. Everything we do at Dales is also fully certified, including the ship recycling, as I mentioned. Everything we do is quality inspected, all coded welders for various processes, structural steel works, pipe work. Everything that you would need, then we are certified to do that. And I think we're probably one of the only companies who offer all this, including the dry docking facilities. So really, if it involves a ship or a vessel, we can really offer the full cycle. We are drifting into potential new builds as well, which is an area which is exciting for us. So it'll really be from new vessel right the way through to end of life. That's what we'll be doing. So thanks for listening to me. Contact details are there. If you've got any questions about Dales Marine or what we're doing, then pick up the phone. Happy to chat. Thanks very much.
That's great. Thanks so much, Andrew. And I should have also said that you've got over 3 decades of experience as a professional yachtsman in the leisure marine sector, as well as developing multi-marine businesses for the European market. So
yeah, I jumped from one side to the other. It's the same. They all float, slightly different challenges.
Huge experience. Thank you. Thanks to both of our speakers. I'm now going to hand back to Ian, who's going to take us through questions.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks again to our speakers today for those really interesting presentations. It's quite interesting to hear about some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes and the kind of things that we're not hearing about on a day-to-day basis. So if anyone would like to ask a question, if you could raise your hand if you'd like to speak out loud, or you can ask a question in the chat. We have a question in the chat earlier on. It's a question for Veronica. It's from Momchil Terziev. Apologies if I haven't pronounced that correctly. And They're asking, my impression is that PLA is only looking at the alternative fuel side of the problem. Is there any work being done on the fluid dynamics side? For example, the electric boat you mentioned has a reach of 15 nautical miles. But if you fit an energy saving device and or optimize the speed, then the reach of the boat would increase.
Thank you for the questions. I think the first thing that first want to emphasize is the PLA is not only looking at the alternative fuel. We acknowledge that that will be a short-term solution, and in terms of long-term solution, we're more looking at replacing some of our old vessels with lower or zero emissions alternative. Apologize if I got some of my facts wrong as well. So the hybrid boat that I refer to, the Leader, it's got 40 nautical miles range and up to a speed of 15 knots. So I think that might be the confusion come from. And I'm not a boat expert, so apologies if I have got the terminology wrong, but I think the boats has been designed specifically for the hull to be efficient, and it's typically use 40% less diesel per nautical miles than conventional hulls. So when we design new vessels, those are the things that have been taken into account, but it's also balance it with the purpose of the vessels. So I hope you answer your question.
Okay, good, thank you. And do we have any more questions? Anyone like to ask a question, please raise your hand or submit it to me in the chat.
Veronica and I must have explained things beautifully.
I think so, yeah. I think one thing that quite a lot of people might be kind of asking at the moment is what impact has the COVID-19 crisis had on particularly on your operations?
From our side of things, very little impact, to be honest. We haven't lost a single day through COVID. I touch wood promptly, but we haven't. From day-to-day runnings, it hasn't really impacted us at all. You know, the guys are outside all the time. We really haven't had anything. Our biggest thing is the delay of vessels arriving with us. So, you know, we do a lot of the ferry services and things like that. And, you know, there's been delays, vessels have been stuck in port for one reason or other. So it's kind of had a wee knock-on effect with that. But in terms of actual days lost for the group, we haven't really lost anything at all. From my side of things, the business development side, I can only say it's been full of opportunities. Because nobody's jumping on planes or jumping in cars. So it's actually been quite easy to network and get folk together that we would probably never have got together, you know, a year ago. So I think whilst it's always all doom and gloom, I actually think there's been a lot of positives. It's given everyone a bit of a breather to sit back and reflect on what we're going to do in the next wee while. So, you know, whilst you know, it's been a challenging time, I think there's been opportunities there as well.
Okay, thank you. Veronica, anything to add on the Port of London Authority side on the COVID impact on the port?
Yes, yes, I think as for us, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we are a slightly different port than most of the other UK ports that we don't do any cargoes handling. So at the beginning of the pandemic, get slightly reduction in some of the cargoes type, but it's slowly creeping back up to normal. I think it's more of a knock-on impact on our stakeholder rather than us as the authority. But I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to come back greener, and because of the air quality experience during the pandemic is a much better air quality because of the reduction of traffic and on land and on the river. I think that will be people have been experiencing that, so hopefully we'll come back greener during the recovery.
Okay, good, thank you. Anyone else have any questions, or even not necessarily questions, any comments you'd like to make on what we've heard about today? No, it doesn't look as if we have any more questions from the audience at the moment. And I'd just like to ask perhaps Veronica and Andrew to add what you see as the kind of potential for future development of the fields that you're working in. Andrew, if you can maybe go first. What you see as the future potential for Dales Marine, particularly relating to the Clyde with Garville and Troon.
Future development is ultimately vessel conversions. At the moment, it's a hot topic. You know, we have the old oil burners still trundling in here, and as we well know, that is due to change. And if we can push that forward in any way as a group, we want to be involved in that. And we are, you know, constantly, as I said in the presentation, looking for opportunities to get ourselves geared up. And so not really waiting for the change, but maybe to kind of push that change forward, as you know, so Dales or the Clyde becomes the go-to place maybe as for a vessel conversion, you know, engine side or you know, use of vessel. So we're very much on that constantly, and you know, with various conversations about electric passenger ferries and all these sort of things. You know, and you can get into conversations, and you know, folk will think it's quite a long way away. It's not that far away at all. You know, so we're really very proactive at, you know, okay, so the next 5-6 years, the vessels will be turning up here that are, you know, hybrid or battery or whatever, and we want to be very much part of that. So that's our immediate challenge, really, is okay, how are we going to adapt, and what services are we going to offer, you know, to the ship owners or shipping companies? So that's the sort of immediate thing that we're looking at, that, you know, Dales as a group needs to adapt to what's going to be the new world, and there's no reason why the Clyde couldn't be part of that, really. You know, bring your vessel to the west coast of Scotland, and you know, we can do the conversion or part of the conversion or whatever. So that's our immediate challenges, really.
Okay, good, thanks. And Veronica, what do you see as the future kind of developments for you for Port of London Authority on the Thames, and do you see any potential lessons in what you're doing there that could apply to the Clyde?
Yes, so as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, the next steps or our priority focus would be establishing when, where, and what need to be put on the river. And it's not just the infrastructures, but it's also about the demand of different energy types. So as Andrew mentioned, could be hybrid, electric charge, hydrogen, ammonia, methanol, the list go on. And looking at the energy density, the volume, the supply chain, the transportation, the storage, and safety aspect of all these different fuels that might be used in the future. So it's just getting a better understanding of that's how it's applied to river, and hopefully we've done some trials on Thames. Maybe it could apply elsewhere. That, I think that's always at the back of our mind, that the solution is possible to apply elsewhere, and through trials and feasibility study, we hope will make we can accelerate the adoption of zero emission technologies in the UK as a whole.
Okay, thanks. And one issue that's come up for us kind of time and again in talking about sustainable shipping, and especially new fuels, if for example, hydrogen or ammonia, is that the ports and the bunkering facilities won't provide the facilities for that until they actually have the vessels that are using these fuels. And likewise, the ship operators won't start using these fuels until they have the provision for it in port. What do you see as a potential role for the port authorities in overcoming that catch-22 situation?
Yes, I think it's always a chicken and egg situation. Obviously, having new vessels or putting up new infrastructures, you're talking a lot of money. So it's always a chicken and egg situation, who makes the first move. For that's why we have recently put out a tender for a feasibility study of what energy infrastructures that should be put out on the Thames, having sort of like a gap analysis to make a step for towards the adaptation. So hopefully by the end of that feasibility study or exercise, it will help move one step forward.
Okay, thanks. And another point that I can maybe raise with Andrew, I mentioned earlier on just how much of the infrastructure on the Clyde has been constrained by housing development and retail and leisure developments. Do you have any issues with that, Andrew, at your site in Greenock?
Do we have any issues with it? Oh, not particularly. I mean, I think, you know, there's always going to be sometimes there's the noise, or, you know, we're a 24/7 facility. So we're never shut. So, you know, occasionally we'll get complaints about the noise or the lights being on, or, you know, things like that, you know, but I think you're always going to get that. I mean, we try and, you know, be as accommodating as possible, but, you know, sometimes it's a wee bit frustrating in that, well, you know, the yard's been here since time began, and, you know, maybe the planner should have maybe thought about that. And if you were buying one of the flats, maybe you should have equally thought about that. So, you know, it doesn't really bother us. We try and accommodate with no intention to, you know, if there's something we can do, we'll do it. You know, the marina beside us has the same issue, you know, halyards and wind going through rigging and everything like that. But, you know, if you want to live near, you know, sort of an industrial area, then that's the thing, you know, that's just what it is. But we don't really have any issues other than that, you know, really.
Well, if there's no further questions, then we can wrap up for today. So thanks again to our speakers today, and thanks to you all for coming along to the webinar. This is the upcoming schedule for future webinars. The next infrastructure webinar is in April, and we'll be looking at development and investment. And of course, we have another technology webinar later this month. We'll be looking at vessel design and build and what's involved in that in terms of sustainability. And if you'd like to find out more about our guest panelists' organisations, you can look at the Port of London Authority, pla.co.uk, or dalesmarine.co.uk. And if you'd like to get any more information from us, you can get in touch. We also have a LinkedIn group for Clyde Sustainable Shipping, and we'll be adding more details on the website at clyde.scot/countdown26 as we continue the countdown to the COP26 conference in Glasgow later this year. Okay, thanks again to our speakers today, and thanks to you all for coming along, and we hope to see you all at future webinars.